loves to take pictures. Thank you for coming. I'm very blessed and I'm very thankful to be here this morning to chat with you a little bit about my newer book, Pieces of Stained Glass. But I made an acquaintance this morning, actually new. In a way, I've seen you and John Knox and didn't know that this lady's daughter and I knew each other a long time ago. I won't say how long. And when she comes to visit, she made a promise that she would bring her daughter to come and visit me, because we were friends a very long time ago. So it's wonderful. So make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver, the other gold. And some of you are golden friends, some of you are silver friends. But I'm so thankful that you're here. Whenever you're, I'm sure there are those of you that have been in front of the public eye, so to speak, and I have been speaking probably in front of people since I was 8 years old, singing and teaching and also preaching and doing various things as far as being able to be a very verbal and wordy person. In fact, I've often been told I'm a little too wordy, and I won't say who has suggested that possibility, but that does happen. If you get me going, I do tend to go on. But that's my nature, because I love words. And I always, even as a child, I can remember in the various schools that I went to, I would sometimes be, particularly if I was in a parochial school, and you know how the nuns are, they would stick me in a corner because I was talking too much and I was supposed to be quiet and listening. But that didn't happen. So, and it still sometimes doesn't happen, although I'm much better at self-control than I was all those years ago. I thought a lot about how I was going to introduce my newest book, Pieces of Stained Glass. And so I'm going to introduce it this way, because you see, everyone here, in a way, has the same history in the sense of what you have overcome in your life. And so this is a memoir done in poetic form. Pieces of Stained Glass. I've been a writer since I was 8 years old. As a matter of fact, the very first poem I had published, I was 8 years old. It was in the Lima News, and I can tell you very easily how old I am. It was in 1949. And so it happens to be in here, and I chose to put it in here because it is a part of my history, and it is a part of my memoirs. And so I decided to put Pieces of Stained Glass together because I had taught last year in 2013 a memoirs course. And I want to mention to you that I have the handouts not only from that memoirs class, but also I have other writing tips because I've been writing a long time. And so, as I said, I've not only been publicly speaking since I was very young, but I also was published at the ripe old age of 8 years old. And so here are my books, Pieces of Stained Glass, Tales of Zoftic, and Secret of the Laurel Crown. And God willing, my health continues to improve. I will also hopefully be writing a sequel to Secret of the Laurel Crown. I have some pieces of the plot put together, but everything here that you see on the table goes to charity. And if you buy pieces of stained glass this morning, all of the money will go to John Knox. And so I'm very, very pleased to be able to give it away, because God has blessed Mac and I very much, and we're very grateful. And so I'm thankful to be able to do that. So hopefully you'll be doubly blessed if you buy Pieces of Stained Glass. And I encourage you to do so, even though you yourself may not, and may have been a long time since you've read poetry, particularly, the non-Hallmark card type of poetry. Now, Pieces of Stained Glass, it's my memoir. And my history, we never know the way a person appears, where they've been. Would you agree? And everyone in this room has overcome myriad of challenges that life brings. I was born overseas, 1941, and my father was in the Army. He was not married to my mother. He was married to someone else. And so, you know what the term for that kind of a child or that kind of a baby is. Fortunately, in our culture, that designation has changed considerably. I, being an Army child, and the relationship that my father and mother had, and the fact that they married many years after I was born. I was 1.5 pounds when I was born, and I really think I wanted to get out, so to speak, because of the situation that I found myself in. After the war, we came to the United States, and I lived in many, many places and went to many, many schools. We came to New York. My father couldn't find a job. He was a very angry man, and he also had very little formal education. Actually, the Army educated him. That's where he really learned to read and write. He could read and write his name, and of course, know the rudiments of being able to move in the world, but he really could not read. The first time he wore shoes, he was 18 years old in the summertime. That was the first time, and he was born in Bon Aqua, Tennessee. And so, family of 10 children, no indoor plumbing, no opportunity to really have an education. And the church that he went to handles snakes and sincerely believed that the mark of Cain was the black man's mark. He did change considerably, but I grew up in that kind of an environment. My mother also, my grandfather on my mother's side, killed himself when my mother was 19. She had a 13-year-old sister, 6 years younger than herself when that happened. And my grandmother, not skilled in any kind of ability to earn a living, and in those years, in Hungary, if, of course, particularly a parent or anyone that committed suicide would be ostracized from society. And so the only way that my mother and my aunt could make a living, because they too had very little education, was to sing and dance and do other things. And that's how my mother met my father, in a cabaret environment. And so here were two people that came together in circumstances, under highly pressured circumstances and situation, and into that I was born. Both my mother and my father were very angry people. And yet, when you look at the culture at that time, plus the situation in Palestine, and of course, there was no Israel when I was born, and my father being in the Army, and he was a liaison. He worked his way up into becoming an officer, and that happened during wartime a lot. And so during those years, we traveled. I lived in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Bangalore, India, in Calcutta, and also in Tehran. In Iraq, Iran, we went all through the Mediterranean because that's where my father was transferred from place to place to place. I was with adults until I was 7 years old. Then finally, the war was over. My father got very homesick, and he decided to return to the States. Now, on my father's side, the family absolutely rejected my father because in the meantime and in the intervening years after we came to the States, my father divorced his childhood sweetheart, who he was married to, and of course married a foreign woman. And in those years, You didn't do that, of course, because we had just fought a war. And so on my father's side, there wasn't any family. On my mother's side, my grandmother and my aunt were in an internment camp during the war because they were in Hungary. And so they were sent to an internment camp, and my mother lost track of them. So the Red Cross found my grandmother and my aunt and brought them to the States. And of course, my parents sponsored them. We came and we lived in New York. Now, I have no formal education at this time. Came to New York, lived in New York for 9 months. Could not find work. My father couldn't find work. There were so many returning servicemen. And out of frustration, he finally was able to find work in Lima, Ohio. And so we went to Detroit first, because when there was no work, of course, the automobile industry was up. So we lived in Detroit for a while with I called them aunt and uncle. And we lived in the living room of their home in Detroit for another 9 months. And now, of course, I'm past kindergarten definitely, because I'm not in the kindergarten when I come to the States. And then I am past the first grade. And in Detroit, I go to school for the very first time, which was a big eye-opener for me. And was there for a very short period of time. And then finally, my father found work in Lima, Ohio, at Superior Coach Corporation. And the Superior Coach made school buses, and also Superior Coach made hearses. And so we went to Lima. My father worked his way up into the company, and I enrolled in school in the very first time. He became a service manager. He was an excellent mechanic. And so then we began to travel again, because he would open up dealerships and set up the dealerships for service. And so he would be the service manager, but he would also train other service managers. So before I was actually 15 years old, I lived and visited 34 states in the United States. I had my education basically in the back seat of our car in hotels and motels. And that's how I lived for the first 15 years of my life, moving around, being with adults. And because God, and I give it all the glory to Him, gave me a high IQ and a good singing voice. And also, I was very, as you can see, very talkative. I was not shy. I was never a shy child. And so in all of the schools, I got the support and the love that I needed in the church, because we always went to church every Sunday. No matter where we were, no matter what city we were in, we went to church. We found a church to go to. And so very early on, I threw myself on God for a lot of reasons, because between my mother and my father, there was a lot of abuse. And that was very, very hidden, because I was never in one place long enough even to share. And in those years, you didn't share anyway. But on top of it, here I am moving around and not really able to form any what you would call connections. And I certainly wasn't going to blurt out in a particular school that I was in for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, while we were staying in a hotel or a motel, while my father was opening up that particular dealership for Superior Coach, that I was going to tell what was going on in the motel and the hotel where we were for that short period of time. And so I learned to perform, and I performed very well. But I never had a home. I never felt I had a home. I never felt I had family. And so some of my poetry you're going to find quite spare. And what I mean by spare is what I have here in my memoirs, because I'm sharing my life with you, you will see it then in my poetry. And I'm doing it in a different sort of way, because I hope through my poetry, and I'll get back to what happened in a few minutes to me after I was 15, but in the sense of my early years, and I was writing, I started a journal. It wasn't a diary of what I ate, even before I was told that that was what writers do, keep a journal. I was writing, and because we moved around so much, I didn't have a lot of personal things, but my journal was mine. And so I would write, and I loved words, and I loved to read. I wasn't very good in the math area, and certainly in the science, because I moved around so much, I wasn't very good at that either. But I loved to read, and it was an escape for me. And so I was reading all the time. And I will say this, my mother encouraged that reading. Wherever we were, we would go to the library. We would also shop. I loved to shop. Because the one thing, whenever my father would be sent to a particular place, whether the city was, no matter where the city was, and the cities all kind of blended together, and so did the states, because we were driving there. My father had a stipend, a mileage, and so that was the way he made extra money. And so we would go around. Plus I had my homework, because out of Lima, Ohio, where my father and where the main headquarters was for Superior Coach, that's where I lined up all the lesson plans were lined up for me until I was 15. And so that's how I received my education. And I was tested. You know, we have the GED today, but I was continually tested. And I was also tested for my IQ, by the way, which to my mother's great pride and joy, she used continually if I didn't do well. Well, you know, you're so smart and you can do this and that and the other thing and so on. Neither one of my parents had high self-esteem of any kind because of their backgrounds and what they had been through. And of course that helped me and initiated the desire in me to become a counselor and to get an education, because you see, that was the way I saw my way out. And also the last thing I wanted to do was to be like either one of them. And so I made a very early decisions that I was going to get an education, and that I was going to learn about my mother and my father, and I was also going to learn particularly about myself. And because I threw myself on God very, very early, my father would have rages. You call that post-traumatic syndrome today. And my mother had what was called a personality disorder, as well as being obsessive, compulsive, bipolar. Both of them were bipolar. Now, all of these terms I learned, of course, in becoming a counselor. I was a licensed family counselor for many, many years and a minister. But throwing myself on God and going to church every Sunday was truly my salvation. Because you see, there I was loved and hugged by people I didn't know, and I heard the word of God, which inspired me that I was loved. And I didn't feel very loved. In fact, I felt that I wasn't loved at all, that I was in the way, and in many ways I was. I remember being on the floorboards in our car, because I was working on my homework in the back seat of the car. And I can remember my father being very angry because he either couldn't read the map, or he had missed the place, or my mother hadn't given him the right information, the right turns, or whatever it was that was an issue that was between them. And my father would, in fact, threaten us with death. My father also had a lot of guns, and when he was very angry and things didn't go well, I used to hide in the closet, under the bed, plump up the pillows in my bed, just in case, as he would run around the house and threaten to kill all of us, and himself, of course, and I would hide. And that's the environment that I grew up in. You would not guess that, looking at me, listening to me, or even thinking about the background, the education that I have. You see, I give all the glory to God. He saved me. in so many ways and helped me overcome so many, many things because of his love. And so I invite you to know him in a very intimate way, because he's an awesome God. And he can really do some things for you that you could never imagine that anyone either has been through or that maybe you're going through right now. And I'm going through some issues right now, and I totally depend upon him to see me through. He's the only one who can. And I know that he is faithful and he is good all the time. We finally moved back to Detroit because my father lost his job at Superior Coach. He was actually fired. They asked him to resign. What had happened was, as he grew older, he became more and more volatile and more difficult to work with. And so he got very tired of working for a company, and so he wanted to come back to Detroit. And so we did. Moved back to Detroit when I was 14 years old. And for the very first time, actually, I would say that there was some stability, because we lived in one apartment on a single street, so to speak, and I went to high school, which at that time was called junior high. It's a little different, of course, today than it was then. It was a very, very good school system, by the way. I loved school. And so my father decided to lease a gas station, and because he was a superb mechanic, and I would go on the weekends and I would work. I would work at his gas station, and I would help him with the books, and I would help him with the money. Because you see, in comparison to my father and my mother, I had an excellent education by the time I was 15. And so when I was 15, my father suddenly died of a coronary thrombosis. He had gone out to eat on a Friday evening and came back, said he had indigestion, slumped over, and died right in the Standard Oil Company mobile gas garage that he was actually leasing the gas station. I was in Northwest Detroit. We lived in Detroit, but the station was in Northwest Detroit. My father did not leave a will, and because he had leased the gas station for about a year, and he did have employees to pump gas and so on, he was heavily in debt. I want to just take a moment and share with you something I'd be very happy to give you. This is not anything that is going to go to charity. I'm going to give this to you. It already is, I would say, something, a charity, is a love offering. I'm going to give it to you as a love offering if you wish it. You don't have to have it. You don't have to take it. But it's called Over 1,000 Tongues. And I wrote this many years ago as a witnessing tool to God's love for me. But in it, it very specifically talks about the situation as well as other situations between Mac and I and so on. So it goes in a little different direction as far as the memoir is concerned, but it's called Over 1,000 Tongues, and it's a booklet. By the way, I have 3 websites. However, back to the debt. My mother had never worked outside the home. I was always translating for her, and because her English wasn't all that great, and because we were heavily in debt, and of course we had creditors first to the gas station, the company that my father leased from, plus the way my parents lived and the way we lived, there wasn't any money at all. I had Social Security start coming in, and so my mother and I moved. I planned the funeral. I became an adult. If I wasn't an adult by 15, at 15, I became an adult. My mother had a breakdown. We were in the Ford Hospital a lot, and that that's in Detroit also. My mother received a lot of psychiatric care. And so I went to school and I went to work. And I worked on the weekends, I worked at nights, and I paid the bills, and I put food on the table. When I graduated in 1959, I was the commencement speaker of my high school graduation. And the commencement address is also in pieces of stained glass. I put myself through school. I continued working, put myself through school, and Wayne State, Bachelor of Arts, Masters of Education, and I have what is equivalent to a PhD, a doctorate in psychology. And so I worked very, very hard. I moved away from home when I was 18, 19 years old in that particular time frame, because by that time my mother was stabilized enough to be able to seek work. And she started working in a clothing store. And so when I moved away, my mother disowned me. She disowned me because, you see, I was supporting her. And of course, the Social Security stopped coming in, because after the age of 18, you don't get Social Security anymore. And so I decided I wanted to be independent. I was independent anyway. And so why not continue to be independent? So I got my own apartment and bought my own car and started going to night school while I was working to put myself through school. And that's where I met Mac. And we fell in love. And for the very first time in my life, Mac and I bought a house after we were married in 1964. That was the first home I ever lived in. House. Because every place I had ever lived was either hotels, motels, or apartments. And so my life, in many ways, my joy, my happiness in the physical realm began then. And because I was writing, and because I had gone to a number of schools, Wayne State University, University of Michigan, Mary Grove College, I took a lot of writing courses, and also because I felt very called into the ministry at that time too, and also because I needed to have the kind of education that enabled me to do the counseling that I was doing, which was family counseling and marriage counseling. And guess where I really learned about what to do, not to do in a marriage. And I learned it from my parents. And everything that I've experienced, of course, has to do with the way I grew up. And that is true for you also. You all have a history. Every single one of you sitting here has a history. You have your particular number of stories and turning points in your life to tell. So I would encourage you to put it down on paper, because it's an awesome thing to see how God has led you, created you to live your life and what you have overcome. And so a good story, and it's a story in pieces of stained glass, even though it's somewhat in poetic form. In a way, it's a story of my life done in a very different genre, which is the poetic form. The awesome thing, as I find myself here in John Knox and having overcome also something that's in the preface about cancer, and I'm finding myself back on chemo. Some of you know that. You may not. But when you read my preface, I was cancer-free when I actually wrote the preface to Pieces of Stained Glass. And God has chosen to bring me through another season, if you will, of chemo. And I just want to share this with you, to say with you that I will be, and do believe, and in fact am on my way to being completely healed. In trying to inspire you, because really all these books that I wrote and all of the words that I've ever spoken, I've always tried to be inspiring. Because you see, I've come through so much, and because I can, and because God has allowed me to do this and continuing to do so, I believe whatever you're going through, you can overcome as well. Because you see, when you trust in the Lord, He actually knows your end from your beginning. And I am a firm believer in that. I always loved books. And so when I think about books and the impact that they had in my life, because you see, that's how I managed so much of my life to overcome. Not only the 66 books of the Bible, but all of the stories that I grew up with. And the stories that I grew up with were very positive and inspirational and helped pull me through. And the authors that I enjoyed reading and so on really, really brought me into other realms than the life that I was living in a very box-like atmosphere as I was growing up. Every year I have a scripture that I stand on, and I want to share that with you because you see, it is what I've stood on as a way of living it will be this month, in fact, 73 years. All the years that I have lived. Let your light so shine before men so that they will see your good works and give glory to God. And so that's really what I'm all about. Even now. Even now. Even now. And so I hope that you will buy all 3 books if you don't have them, but that you will buy pieces of stained glass, because in it I hope to touch you. Whether you've had my particular experiences or not, you've had your own experiences. And because you've had your own experiences of overcoming and struggles and the things in your life that perhaps you might not have been able, or perhaps you choose not to put in a poetic form, you will say, ah, yes, that's me also. That touches my life also. And so I hope that is why you will be inspired to buy pieces of stained glass, that you will be doubly blessed. Blessed by what you read, but blessed by knowing that you're giving your $15 to really support John Knox. And by the way, I love being in John Knox.
We love having you.
We love you, Mac and I. And I'm so thankful to be here. And so now I would like to leave it open to you if you would like to ask any questions. Mac has the mic over there, and yes, let him hand you the mic.
Andrea, I think your presentation was absolutely splendid.
Thank you.
Would you do all of us a great favor by reading one of your favorite poems?
One of my
and be sure to tell them about the stained glass cover.
Okay. The stained glass cover, I became acquainted with Kansas Wright, who actually was here for 9 years, which I learned about her. She's no longer here, but she was working in the marketing department. But we became good friends, and we supported Kansas because we support the scholarship fund here, but we supported Kansas in many other ways. And I knew that she was working, I believe, on her master's, and she was wonderful with computers and so on. And so I went to her and I said, Kansas, I'm writing and putting together pieces of stained glass, and I need someone to do the cover. Would be thrilled to pay you to do the cover. Would you please do the cover? And Kansas Wright, right here in John Knox Village, did the cover based on what I shared with her, how I wanted the cover and some thoughts and ideas. And also in each one of these books, she also designed the bookmark, and you'll love the bookmark too. She designed the bookmark. I'm sorry that she's not here. She was going to be here, but she got married, and so now I think she's going to Kentucky. If she isn't in Kentucky already, her husband is a medic now in the U.S. Army, and he's receiving training, so she's with him. But Kansas Wright, right here in John Knox Village, designed the cover, and she did a beautiful, beautiful job. Now let me put my mic down and let me find something that I'd be happy to share with you. And think about what I would like to share with you, to read to you. Just give me a moment. I'm going to read more than one. How's that?
That's great.
Okay. In the preface, stained glass. Like pieces of stained glass, I have gathered glimpses of myself, remembered inside each poem, then stoked by fire in kilns of conflict and love, sufferings and joys, remorse and spirit. My light and his shimmered through dark colors, to create rainbow words into ribbons unfurled, flying high into the winds of eternity. There I have lived, there will I live. Blue-green. Break me out, Lord. Flow me out, torrent me out of old earth, tumble me into white water, foam white, spilling down, cascading round to return to the deep green still. Break me out into spring water, mountain me clean, move me down, down, sliding clean, pure wet to the mainstream, to the lap shore. Breaking the edge line between sand and sky. Oh, let me return to the salt deep sea.
Read one towards the end. One of them towards the end.
I'm sorry, Harriet.
Can you read one of the poems towards the end of the, because they are very good. Yes.
Okay. I have lived in spare places.
That's good. Lands
of brown ground rock, waterless ways with night-hard winds and melting hot days. Well-traveled, world-traveled me, knowing all configurations of each piece of property where I have ever stood. Now I stand, longing for the square of green and the soft sighs of rain's wind, for rustling, ruffling greens with winking suns, a habitat of moist green bloom. There I could sit, bask in wet light, and view the multiply of lush, warm life that spreads the rich green blooms to wastelands I have lived.
That's good.
At the end, I have poems for children, and you will see Tales of Zoftic. There are some poems that I did not include in Tales of Zoftic, and also there are poems. One of Mac's favorite poems, I asked him, I said, okay, Mac, all the poems that I chose to put in this book, because most of them have been published in small presses and magazines and so on, and my bio is also in the back of the book, as well as I said, the poems from Tales of Zoftic, which I did not include in Tales of Zoftic, but there are other poems that I wrote and had published in children's magazines as well. And so this is one I said, okay, Mac, what's your favorite poem in here? And of course it changes depending on where he's coming from. But I can read one to you because you're going to find that in this book as well. It's called Oh for Jello. I sing for my supper, said Simon McGee. I sing for my jello, so mellow, said he. It jiggles, it giggles, it wiggles so free. It slides off my spoon just as neat as can be. So I sing for my supper with very much glee. For after my supper, the jiggle, the wiggle, the giggle It's in me.
Isn't that cute? And Mac reads one from the Zofstik, which is very good.
Okay, I'll read you one from Zoftik, and there are other poems.
Let Mac do it.
Let Mac do it?
He does it so well.
He does it so well. Okay, you want to come up here and do it? Sure.
Come on, Mac.
Pick a Zoftik poem
family
that was
project.
not included. And so
Like your
if you
family.
want to read all of the Zoftik poems, you can read all of the Zoftik poems, but you can read one of the poems that's not included in here. So you'll have a sense of what Tales of Zoftik is like.
This one is cut grass.
Yeah, that's good.
Zoftik up, Zoftik down, Zoftik all around the town. Zoftik's master is called Jim. He is very tall and slim. Zoftik follows Jim around. Whenever weekend work abounds, House Beautiful is Jim's great pride. There is much to do outside. Jim mows both the front and back, with Zoftik bouncing in the track. The mower cuts into the lawn. He yells at her to get out on the driveway, even though he knows she loves the fresh cut grass he mows. She chews grass up, then spits grass out. Green particles stick all about her muzzle as she runs behind the green-brown mustache unrefined. When Jim is finished in the yard, green-stained paws will be rubbed hard. You're like a leprechaun, says he, but you've no gold that I can see. Perhaps it's just as well, I guess. I prefer your sauciness. I'll cut the back this afternoon. A bush or two I'll even prune. Let's see what Mary has for lunch. If I know her, I have a hunch. She'll make a sandwich piled up high, and ice cream with a piece of pie. Her green paws lift also her snout. Thoughts of food bring green tongue out. Jim laughs and says, I'll tell you what, so you won't think you've just forgot. You'll get a biscuit, though I'm sure you'll think yourself an epicure. Zoftik up, Zoftik down, Zoftik all around the town. Zoftik's tastes are not gourmet. She prefers cut grass entree.
Very good. Story about the dog, yeah. Very good.
Any other questions? Anything you'd like to know about writing? As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to answer. Yes.
Does Zoftik have a meaning?
Does Zoftik have a...
Does Zoftik have a meaning?
Yes, Zoftik is Yiddish. And in fact, you have to do the guttural, Zoftik. It means well endowed, and only a female can be called well endowed. It's an endearment, but it really means whatever's up front. And of course, Zoftik is a black Labrador, and you know, black Labradors can be very chesty. And of course, as they get older, they can get very broad as well. And so, a friend of mine, we rescued Zoftik while I was taking while I was taking a creative writing course, but because of a creating writing course, I had to write the first two poems that actually are in Tales of Zoftik 4 poetry course, and it had to be in rhyme. So I did it as homework many, many years ago from Zoftik. We rescued behind our house one of 5 pups that was abandoned behind our house in Canton, Michigan. And so at that time, that's where the poetry came from. So when I actually fully retired, and of course you never retire from ministry, but from being a senior pastor or on a pastoral staff in 2005 and consolidating 2 offices, I came across the original 2 poems because, well, you know how you accumulate things, especially from the past. And so I went through, read those 2 poems, and I thought, well, you know, I have the time to sit down and I have the time to make a fuller story. And that's how Tales of Zoftik developed. And it became a full book of rhymed chapters in the life of Zoftik.
I have the book that you're talking about, Zalt, right here in front of me. Is that, did you ever have the dog itself?
Yes, she was a rescued dog. We had her for more than 10 years. And she also was, in fact, we rescued 9 dogs. And before we moved here, we rescued a greyhound called Princess, and we're going to visit her sometime this week because the family that we gave her to, and she was the family is a neighbor of ours that live right across the street from our old home. So we're going to visit Princess because she's a teacher. And so she's off this week, and so we're going to visit Princess. So we rescued 9 dogs. I always wanted a dog growing up, and because of the circumstances, I couldn't. So one of the very first things Mac and I got when we were married was a dog, a puppy, a doxy, with lots of moxie, by the way. That doxy with lots of moxie is in here. And Tales of Zoftic. Yes.
I bought the book and I shared it with my great-grandchildren. One is 3 and the other is 6. And I must tell you that I think I have it now about 2 years. They repeatedly ask that book be read over and over and over again. It's so delightful. They love it. And they've gotten, the 3-year-old couldn't read, well, she's beginning to read now, but she would look through the pictures, and of course she read through because of the illustrations. They were all so beautiful. Thank you for the book.
Thank you. Well, you know, if they want to know a little bit more, there are 3 poems in here that aren't in Tales of Zoftic, so you're welcome to read those to her if you would like to get pieces of stained glass. I did not include them in this, but in Tales of Zoftic. Yes.
And your books make wonderful gifts.
Yes, thank you. Yes, they do. And because you're giving it as a gift, but you're also giving it as a blessing too, because not a penny goes in our pocket.
Now, since you lived here in John Knox, have you had a dog here in your apartment?
I'm sorry about...
Have we had a dog here?
Have we had a dog here? No, we didn't, because when Zoftic was a rescue from Greyhound, and she ran track for 2 years, and so she's way too big. She's up to here, and lots of legs. So no, we were not able to bring her. We tried to bring her because she's she's wonderfully well trained dog, and believe me, highly trained. Because she's had all the training plus all of the love, but we could not bring her because we couldn't pick her up. There's no way we could pick her up. She's almost 70 pounds.
No,
yes.
she doesn't do. She's really good. Very good.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm so blessed that you were able to listen to my story, my history, and I'm a very, I told you I was a talker, so I'm very open to sharing anything that you would like to ask me about my past, about my relationship with the Lord, because we're very close, the Lord and I, or anything even present. I'm very transparent, and as Harriet has found out.
And let's not forget she is a notable.
Yes, absolutely. I'm notable.
Okay,
and
let's hear it.
oh yes, because I love to sing. I love to sing. I enjoy singing very, very much. I have a lot of fun with that group, and they're very dear to my heart. And I know a lot of you are praying for me too, which I appreciate very much as I go through the second bout of chemo. There's also the Saturday night. We have a Saturday night special, Saturday Spectacular here. So I want to encourage you to come, and if I'm not too tired, I would like to come too. It's a tiredness.
We're featuring 2 very, very prominent singers from Palm Beach. One is with the Palm Beach Opera, Peter, who is he's terrific, and Suzanne. And Bob Sharon's going to be playing the piano, and I don't think you want to miss it, because if you go to New York, you'd pay $150 for this concert. So you're going to be saving money and having a wonderful evening with wine and cheese to start with. And Suzanne, the soprano who's coming, said they'll be mellow like Jello when we start to sing.
So the jiggle, the wiggle, and the giggle can be in you.
That's right. That
Okay.
poem is so cute.
Thank you for coming. I'm here to sign books, and hopefully you'll be encouraged either to give them as a gift or hopefully encouraged to read it for yourself as well.
Let's hear a big applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.